Welcome to the Divine Council Worldview podcast. This episode we will be dealing with Genesis 27, the story of Isaac blessing Esau before he dies. Wait a second. That was Jacob. That was not Esau. Imagine the heart monitor if he had a blood pressure cuff on his arm when he realized that was the wrong son. I bet you that shot up. That's our story this time, Mike, and we'll enjoy doing it together. And we'll do the whole hour on, or the whole time on that story of Genesis 27. In getting into this story, something that I find most study Bibles, I think all that I've checked, have missed, I want to introduce an idea. And so when we as a group are, the listeners with us in walking through this text, it jumps off the page to them, okay? And I'm going all the way to the end of the Bible and kind of working my way backwards. In Philippians 1:3, Paul uses the phrase, I thank my theos upon every remembrance of you. He ends the book same way, 4:19, and my theos, translated God in our Bibles, and my theos shall supply all your need. Interesting how Paul claims a certain God, a certain theos. That doesn't surprise us in a Divine Council worldview, but I'm saying that or bringing that up because if you want to find the question of which God, you can go all the way through the Bible, even well into the New Testament. Coming backwards then toward our text today, I'm going to stop in 2 Samuel 22, which is a poem written by David, and it's repeated, I believe, in Psalm 18. But it has phrases like this in verse 7, 2 Samuel 22:7. In my distress I called upon Yahweh and cried to my God, my Elohim, of course in Hebrew. Verse 22, I have kept the ways of Yahweh and have not wickedly departed from my Elohim. 29, you are my lamp, O Yahweh. Verse 30, by you I can run against a troop, by my Elohim I can leap over a wall. My point is that when you talk about my God, my Elohim in the Old Testament, no one's better known for claiming Yahweh, and many do, but no one's better known for it than the psalmist David. He loves to call him my God. Backing up from there, David has a great-great-grandmother. Did I get the number of greats right? Great-great-grandmother, I believe it is. Her name was Ruth, a Moabitess, which is a good story to remind us that you don't have to be an Israelite to believe in Yahweh. You can be a non-Israelite. You can be one of the goyim, one of the others, one of the non-Jewish people in the Bible, and individually make that move to become a Yahwist. And when we go to Ruth 1, we have the kind of language a person would use in their conversion story, where she says to her mother-in-law Naomi, your people shall be my people, and your God my Elohim. Your Elohim will become my Elohim. And that's, again, a John 3:16 moment in the Old Testament. Salvation is won by the which God question being answered properly. Moving backwards again toward Genesis, I'm going to stop in Exodus chapter 8. Then Pharaoh called for Moses. Remember the fight they're having about going into the wilderness and sacrificing? Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, go sacrifice to your Elohim in the land. And Moses said, it is not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians. In other words, in the land, remember we've touched on this fascinating moment of cosmic geography. Pharaoh wants them to go sacrifice in Egypt. And notice the response of Moses. It is not right to do so in the land of Egypt, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to Yahweh, because they're in Egypt, to Yahweh our Elohim. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then will they not stone us? And so the argument comes, we've got to depart from Egypt to sacrifice because of this cosmic geography issue. 8:28. Pharaoh finally says, I will let you go that you may sacrifice to Yahweh your Elohim. 10:8. So Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh. Go serve Yahweh your Elohim. 10:16. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and said, I have sinned against Yahweh your Elohim and against you. Verse 17. Now therefore Please forgive my sin only this once and entreat Yahweh, your Elohim. The difference between David saying my Elohim and Pharaoh saying your Elohim is not just incidental. It's critical to the story of, again, asking the question, which God is at play, which is, again, Divine Counsel Worldview 101 kind of material. We're always asking which God is in play. So we could have expanded that conversation for an hour. No doubt about it, but I'm recommending we jump now into chapter 27 of Genesis and watch the story of the Jacob-Esau tricking thing about their father. Wouldn't you know it, play on the story of which God these two boys worship and how it comes into the very narrative in front of us. So, are you ready to go, Mike? I haven't let you really say even hi.
Hi, folks. I am here.
You've been here the whole time, listening away. So,
just very observant, but yes, ready to dive in. Well, actually, one thing I did notice, right, when you brought up that first passage from Philippians where Paul says, "My God," and towards the end when he says, "Also, my God," I thought verse 20 was also very important, right? It's not just only Paul saying, "My God," he then says, "To our God and Father."
Yeah.
Right, like it goes from the singular, first person singular to then first person plural. That ultimately, like the expansion is to bring all people, to all community into the worship of Yahweh.
Beautiful point. Yep. That's a nice paraphrase of the purpose of the New Testament, turning my to our. That's really what we're trying to do, turning my to our. That's what a father does in a family. That's what a grandfather does for his kids. You're trying to turn the my to the our. All right, 27:1. It came to pass when, and by the way, the ESV Study Bible, fascinatingly, on page 100. Do I have it in my pile? I didn't bring it with me, but so I'm just going to do a shout out. Again, collect study Bibles, read them voraciously. I read the stuff below the line more than I read the text because I've read the text enough over my life to kind of know what the text is going to say, but I love the study notes of study Bibles, right? And the ESV Study Bible on page 100 has a chart showing the age of Jacob in the famous stories of Jacob. And when it comes to the Jacob-Esau story that's in front of us here in chapter 27, the children's storybooks have them being, 22, even teenagers. In the real life story of Genesis 27, Jacob and Esau are 77 years old. And when Jacob marries Rachel coming up, he's going to be 84. So in other words, these guys are grandparents by this point. Jacob and Esau, their dad is really old, and they're a mere 77. But if you want to mark your Bibles, that I would put they're age 77 right now. So these are grown men doing a grown up thing in front of their aged father.
Ron,
go ahead.
There's an interest. This is reminding me of an idea. I remember talking with one of my closest friends back in my youth days at my old church. He mentioned, I think it was Meredith Klein. He was a Gordon Conwell professor. And one of his books, he proposed this idea that there is something very peculiar or special about Abraham's family, or this lineage, that of like, why is it we can get to a place where Sarah, who is past her 80s, something like that, and yet she still looks gorgeous. That men who unbeknownst to them, they will want her as part of their harem, right? Like, why? And so I think Klein apparently made the suggestion that they may be old, according to our thinking and the technical number of years, but something about their vitality or about their appearance, they still look relatively young. That there's something's interestingly going on. But anyhow, it's just an interesting thing, right? Because whenever you see cartoons of these kind of stories, they also try to portray Jacob and Esau as though they look young, and yet technically they're older. Yeah. So what is going on?
The 12 tribes born to Jacob, he'll be 94 and on, 91, in fact. Rachel, his loved wife, he won't have her for even 7 more years. So,
yeah.
Anyway, 27:1. It came to pass when Isaac was old. Now he's going to die well after this, so he's thinking he's dying, and he's really not. But he's old. His eyes are so dim he could not see. That's a key to the story. That he called Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." And he answered him, "Here I am," which is a Hebrew way of saying yes. I'm here. And he said, "Behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me. And make me savory food such as I love." And again, this is a story I'm sure that had been replayed earlier many times between Esau and his father Jacob. "And bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Now, this brings up, the question of blessing, and you can look this up in, again, cultural study Bibles. And what you'll find, even in Bible dictionaries, that the blessing concept, again, which is very common. I mean, you go all the way back to, the first chapter of Genesis, God blesses the seventh day, things like that. God blesses the animals. So it can, barak or barakah can be used as a verb for very normal, blessing something in a very incidental kind of a way. But the idea of a father passing a blessing onto a son seems to be very culturally driven here, where we are not even sure. There's nothing in the Bible about this, about the privilege of a man to bless, or shall we say, irrevocably put a statement on someone or his son, and that statement has to be true. That idea is not a biblical concept as much as a cultural one. And yet it's going to drive the story, right? That a father is bringing in his son, probably more than just I hope you have a good day. This now, some commentators even think, is the actual conference of leading the tribe in the next generation. Beyond the birthright, which might have been more of a material thing, an inheritance right thing. Now this probably has something to do with the leadership of the clan being passed on to his son. What's curious to me, and I throw this open to you, Mike, because I don't have a good answer, is why would he be doing this to Esau? If my theory is correct, or our theory is correct, that Esau is not even a Yahwist, what in the world is Isaac doing giving the leadership of the clan to a 77-year-old non-Yahwist? That I don't have a good answer for that. Do you want to try?
I mean, I think a part, like, it goes back into, I think, the last episode that we had talked about this, right? Where you had both parents favoring different children. And I do wonder if Isaac's favoritism towards Esau is ironically blinding him, which is actually kind of even how the first verse in this chapter starts off with, is that he's old and his eyes were dim. That there's almost this blinding that is happening of, like, he's not even a Yahwist. You know this implicitly by the fact that he married 2 women who were from a people who don't worship Yahweh. And so what are you trying to do? I wonder if this is Isaac's attempt of trying to bring Esau into the worship of Yahweh. Like, I'm going to give you this blessing that ultimately came from.
I haven't even thought of that one.
Right. Of that heat. Because remember earlier, right? Abraham never got a chance to actually do this very thing that Isaac is doing now for Esau, or ironically later for Jacob. That he never got the personal blessing from Abraham just because they were living in 2 separate locations. But it's then God who steps in to that place of, I am blessing you, Isaac. And now he's trying to do the blessing. I wonder if he's trying to, in some sense, like corral Esau into, you have to worship Yahweh now because I'm giving you the blessing that I had received from Yahweh himself. And so, yeah.
I like your idea that we don't have to necessarily, or how, let me try to paraphrase what you're saying because I had not heard of it before, but it makes sense. The God that Esau worships could still have been in play, and that he was trying to bring him through this moment the ultimate invitation to not only accept the inheritance right or the leadership of the clan, but to inherit the God that this tribe is going to be worshiping. In other words, that could have been a separate question to him. Interesting possibility. based on what we're going to see. And I think anyone following in their text can, I'm preparing people to see this, that the question of which God is so much part of the conversation between Jacob, Esau, and Isaac, that, and even their wives, Rachel and Rebekah and Leah and so forth, that the question of where Esau was on the spectrum of had he chosen Yahweh or not may have been in play. I hadn't thought of that, but anyway. Verse 5, now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and remember who Rebekah favors. And Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob, her son, and said, indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau, your brother, saying, bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you, that's Esau, in the presence of Yahweh before my death. Again, that might hint toward, I'm going to do this in the presence of the God I want you to worship, something like that. Interesting. Mm-hmm. But anyway, now therefore, my son, verse 8, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock, bring me from there 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make savory food for them. For your father, such as he loves. Now, whether or not he knows the difference between goat meat and wild game is kind of interesting, but she's able to do it in a way that I think she knows how she can be tricked, or he can be tricked. But then verse 10, then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, and that he may bless you, Jacob, before his death. So Rebekah's in on this. Again, I find the text to be not concerned at this point about the morality of their decision-making on any part as much as, again, what's going to happen on a bigger picture. Verse 11. And Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man. Now, how hairy, of course, we have yet to hear, but it's going to be a bizarre way of showing his father what kind of skin Esau has when he puts on the goat thing. But remember, he was born as a hairy boy. My guess is he would have looked strange coming down the alley if I had seen him. And I'm a smooth-skinned man. I'm a normal guy. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I should seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. And his mother said, let your curse be on me. I think she says this with a sense of, well, don't worry. This is her way of saying, I'll take it if I have to. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. And he went and got them and brought them to his mother. And his mother made savory food such as his father loved. So this took better part of a day for this story to unfold. Then Rebekah took, and here's the deception coming in various levels. She took the choice clothes of her elder son Esau. Now that would have a smell, right? That would be not just a general look from a man who can't see, but when you get up to someone's clothes, that's them, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the kids of the goats on the hands and on the smooth of his neck. Now that's what it felt like to be, that's what it was like to feel Esau, to feel a goat. I'm often taught this by saying, if you want to know what Esau felt like, go to your local zoo and pet a goat. Crazy. Then she gave the savory food and the bread, which she had prepared, into the hand of her son Jacob. So the point is, he needs to smell, feel, and even eat like this is Esau in front of him. So he went to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? There's, again, the way the narrator plays this out. And I see, the kids watching or hearing this story with great intent. I wonder if Dad is going to figure this out. I have twin aunts. They're 70. And I still have trouble telling them apart on the phone when I, talk, and there's a group, I put it on speaker and I'm talking to my mom and her sisters, and is that Darla or is that Donna? I don't know. And they're 70 and you cannot tell the difference. So they sound close, but not identical. And Jacob said to his father, on verse 19, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. There's his, that's his way of bringing in, I was there kind of a thing. I'm not making this up. Please arise, sit and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly? Okay, there's the problem. I gave him a job of going out into the wild, which usually takes a bit of a day, and you're bringing back something as though it was available to you right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And he said, and this is the first time this phrase is used in Genesis, and it's only going to appear one other time, because Yahweh, your Elohim, brought it to me. Now, again, first occurrence is always important, even the second one. In fact, the second one is interesting. It's in 43, verse 23. Perfect use of the your Elohim is in Genesis 43, 23. Do I have it right? Joseph is, well, he puts the cup in, whose sack was it? Benjamin's sack. Joseph saw Benjamin with them. So 43:16, they bring Benjamin back to Egypt. And of course, the brothers don't know. This is the first time all 11 brothers are standing in front of Joseph, whom they think he's just a Egyptian ruler. Of course, by Egyptian, we mean worshiping other deities, right? Mm-hmm. So then you have, they're wondering about this cup thing. Verse 22, we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. The use of the pronoun our is so important. And he, Joseph, said, peace be with you. Do not be afraid. Your Elohim and the God of your father has given. If he had said, my Elohim did it, he would have given himself away. So you have to have your Elohim there to make sense. By the way, that would be a small g. Right? I mean, our Bibles, to be fair, putting parenthesis or quotation marks in verse 23, you've got a lowercase the g there. Because that's how Joseph would have sounded to his brothers. Peace be with you, your Elohim, your small g God, and the small g God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. So, again, we love the Bible for how careful it is. And I'd recommend coming back now to 27, verse 20. Mm-hmm. Jacob is not only trying to smell, feel, and eat like his brother or give food like his brother, he's trying to sound theologically like his brother. Yeah. And that's why instead of saying, because the Lord our God brought it to me, he said, again, first time in the text, I think that's why it jumps off the page to us, because Yahweh, your, not my, your God, brought it to me. And there's the first evidence that I'm going to use for Esau not claiming Yahweh, giving that Yahweh Elohim to his dad, but not to himself, is the first evidence right off the bat that Esau is not a Yahwist. Making sense so far, Mike? Any reaction? By the way, I could not find any of my study Bibles even bringing this up, which here's where the Divine Council worldview, again, once you see it, you can't unsee it, as many people have said. This is the kind of thing you can't unsee, is when people talk in terms of your Elohim in front of someone else, you know which God now is probably in play or which one is not in this case. Verse 21. Isaac, I think, he's duped, especially that your Elohim thing. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, felt him and said, well, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. And he said, are you really my son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, bring it near to me, and I will eat of my son's game, so that my soul may bless you. And the you there, of course, is Esau on his head. So he brought it near to him. He ate. He brought him wine, and he drank. Come near and kiss me, my son. He came near and kissed him, and there's the clothes. He smelled the smell of his clothing, and blessed him and said, now this is intended for Esau. Everything that we're reading in this poem is meant for Esau. Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field, which the Lord has blessed. Therefore, may God give you, now again, he would be talking about Yahweh at this point, using the general term Elohim, of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. Back to your theory, Mike, that he was going to be challenging Esau as a separate conversation to become a Yahwist. This would fit still, because notice he is saying, may Yahweh give you, and all these things are material blessings, but none of them necessarily are the privilege of being, my God goes with me wherever I go. That kind of language is not there. It's more material blessings. So interesting again that it's intended for Esau, given to Jacob. And so that's how the story works. I once sent, stop me if I told you the story, but the intent of the speaker is a fascinating part of, I once did a doctoral paper, kind of like you just did. You know how you had a paper you had to write for a doctoral seminar. And I did mine on, you always have to choose your own topic, right? You can't do something that's been done. And I did it on intent of Mosaic law, that there, and then I compared it to Code of Hammurabi and Lipit Ishtar and laws of Eshnuna and stuff like this, the other law codes that we found, and noticing how intent is behind so many of the laws, and it's not what happened, it's what you intended to do. And this is, of course, through Torah, that if you intended to kill someone versus if the axe head fell off accidentally, the punishment was much, much different. To which I'm arguing in that paper for the intent of law shows the personality of God behind even Torah, where we want to get granular and say this is that, and the XYZs and the dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's is what God's all about. My argument is no, God's after intent. So then you can go from intent to the life of Jesus, where he would even say, remember, divorce was not given to men because God wanted it. It was given to men because they were weak of heart. They were in a situation where they needed divorce law. And, so I had a theological reason why I wrote the paper, but it was a lot of fun to unpack Torah with the eye toward intent more than, tit for tat kind of thing. And when I come to this one, this is fascinating to me because here God is watching this story knowing that Isaac is blessing Esau. In his mind, he's blessing Esau. And yet the whole story, even as we would say God going forward, is going to go by the very words, not the intention of Isaac. Once when I did a wedding for a couple, I accidentally sent their marriage certificate that they give to the officiant after the wedding. I put it in the mail and I sent it to the wrong county recorder, for the wedding certificate. And I got it back like 2 weeks later and it said, this is the wrong county. It needs to go somewhere else. And of course, on the bottom of the page, it says must be filed within 5 days of the wedding. Well, I called in a frantic huff thinking, and I even said to the recorder, are they married? Because I sent it to the wrong place. It says on the bottom 5 days. And she laughed and said, no, we just put it there so pastors will, be timely. But frankly, here's how the state law in Minnesota actually reads. The officiant, when he with intent says a couple is married, that's when they're married. It's not a matter of paperwork. When the officiant says with intent, and that those two words are important, because otherwise the night before when you have the rehearsal, would that count? I now pronounce you man and wife. And according to state law, it's when the intent of the officiant gives the declaration. I found that to be fascinating because then she said, yeah, they're married. Don't worry about it. Send it to the right place and it'll be fine. So state law equals Torah on this level. It's God's intent that really is going on here, not what is officially said on paper or even in front of people. So anyway, back to this, this was caught by one of the people in our Bible study when they said, why would God go with this when the intent of Esau or the intent of Isaac was not even on Jacob, yet that's how God seems to be playing it out. But we've talked about this previously on our time together, that this is how the story is working, that God's overall movement of the story can even include the deception of a boy to his father, something like that. So, well, then it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob. Jacob had scarcely gone out. He also then came in from his hunting, brought savory food, and brought it to his father, and said to his father, "Let my father arise, eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me." And his father said to him, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm your son, your firstborn, Esau." And here's where his blood pressure must have shot through the roof. Then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, "Who? Where is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him. And indeed he, Jacob, shall be blessed." It's as though he could not take back what he had said. We're not sure why he couldn't take it back. It doesn't say. But in their culture, apparently, once that signature of a spoken word is given, he felt it was unable to be taken back. Esau heard the words of his father. He cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry and said to his dad, "Bless me, even me also, my father." But he said, "Your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing," again, the specific blessing of leading the tribe. And Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me twice." Now he's recalling both stories. The first is the birthright back in 25. And now he has taken away my blessing. "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" And Isaac says, "Well, I have a blessing for you. And here it is. Verse 39, Isaac, the first time what was intended for Esau went to Jacob. This one is intended for Esau, and he gives it to Esau. So everything is said here based on he knows exactly what and who Esau is. "Behold, your dwelling shall be of the fatness of the earth." So you're going to be a blessed man. "Of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live." This is the difference. "And you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass when you become restless that you shall break his yoke from your neck." So the blessing or the prediction given to Esau is clearly one of blessing, as it were, materially, but also just like Ishmael, you'll be a person of war, of dissonance, a person who is going to be at odds with your brother. And frankly, you will serve your brother, just again as a matter of prediction. "And it shall come to pass, you shall break his yoke." It's probably the picture of a animal that doesn't necessarily win the war against his master, but he's in the business of breaking the yoke. And then another yoke put back on him, and it breaks that one too. So it's just this constant battle that is going to go between these two boys. And again, Esau is the progenitor of another, people group. We're going to be finding that as we go forward. I asked ChatGPT, because I have not read the entire Quran. I've read bits and pieces, and I just asked, is Esau ever mentioned in the Quran? I wonder if I can pull it back up real quick. What's nice about ChatGPT is it remembers your questions. No, the Quran does not include the story of Esau being tricked by Jacob. While the Quran contains stories of many prophets and significant figures from the Bible, it does not cover every narrative found. The story of Jacob and Esau, this one, is specific to the Bible and is found in the book of Genesis. So this story is not in the Quran, and whatever traditions build up over Esau in the Muslim tradition are not based on this story, at least in the text. So,
can I mention?
Well, anything you want to comment on at this point, Mike?
Yeah, there's in the Faith Life Study Bible notes, it does mention that these words from Isaac to Esau, they seem to be describing what eventually will happen with Esau's descendants. Because when David comes to power, Edom, the Edomites, essentially, they become a vassal state of Israel under David. And so there's that whole entire, you will serve your brother kind of issue coming up. And it mentions here for the line from your neck, So the whole entire breaking of the yoke. In the 9th century BC, Esau's descendants, Edom, eventually revolted against Jacob's descendants, represented by the southern kingdom of Judah, in 2 Kings 8, verses 20 to 22. The southern kingdom of Judah had several conflicts with Edom thereafter. Yeah. So it seems to be a sort of describing what they will eventually start seeing once we get into the king narratives.
It's interesting that Edom is not among the kingdoms that is to be wiped out in Deuteronomy 7. When they come into the land, they're going to skirt the Dead Sea on the eastern side, and they're going to go through Edom, through Moab, and then enter into Canaan from the east, going west, and they will leave, as it were, Edom alone in that sense. And I think that was Moses' intent, was to leave Edom alone. And yet you have the 7 kingdoms of Canaan that were to be wiped out. So there's a clear difference in the story to come, that Edom is not going to be among the nations to be destroyed. There will be individual Edomites again that will be coming into Yahwism. I have no doubt about that. And again, Moabites as well. So the question of which God a person worships is an individual question that we've been learning about, and I think that's going to be very easily seen as we move through the Old Testament story with this worldview, that the question will be, beyond your tribal leaders, who do you want to worship can be a choice of the individual, and that's even true of Esau and his family to come. If in doubt, again, let me do this now because, again, we're talking Esau. So Esau will become a kind of a side story from here, but, he's going to be introduced into the story here and there. 28:8. Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. Well, 3 guesses why, right? They are not Yahwists. So Esau went to Ishmael and took Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife in addition to the wives he had. So he marries a cousin. And notice it's from Ishmael. And then looking ahead to chapter 36, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. There it is. That's where he's going to find a familiar religious theme, the women of Canaan. Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and so forth. I'm not going to try to even get their names right. And Basemoth is Ishmael's daughter. Verse 6, 36:6. Then Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the persons of his household. He is going to be a wealthy man, his cattle and his animals and all the goods. And he went to a country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. So in fact, one more. Go to 36:40. And these were the names of the chiefs of Esau. And again, I won't mention them all, but the last verse of chapter 36, Chief Magdiel and Chief Iram. These were the chiefs of Edom according to the inhabitants of the land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites. Again, best evidence that Esau was not a Yahwist. He is the father of people who are not Yahwists. And again, can you more clearly state he is not a Yahwist than that he will become the father of those who do not want Yahweh to be their God. So,
Ron, would it be...
Well, yeah, go ahead.
So I was just trying to kind of say, I think for our audience, right, especially in a modern context, sometimes we miss out on how, like, it's interesting, right? We can see... You have Moabites, you have Edomites, and we know some of them will eventually convert to worshiping Yahweh. But like the general assumption is almost that your ethnicity or the people group that you come from is directly tied. Almost, it's generally presumed that it's tied to some sort of deity, to some sort of elohim that there's a connection to.
Right.
And so then thus why the contrast of like certain Moabites like Ruth, who will make a declaration later on saying, your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. That identifying between my people group is now going to be, I will now identify with your people group, and by proxy, in parallel, your God, your people's God is going to become my God as well. That this connection between your ethnicity and the God that you worship is almost goes hand in hand a lot of times in their thinking, in their culture, in their day.
You brought up this in another conversation, another podcast that I listened to, and I really enjoyed your Chinese heritage, about how hard it was. In fact, pick up the story for me before I misstate it. But the idea of ancestor worship and how, here's what I caught, and I want you to repeat it here if you can. The difficulty of a traditional Chinese person in conversion to Jesus is about, losing your respect for your ancestors. Did I get that right? And how can you pick it up from there?
It's assumed almost by those who are hearing the news of their children or their grandchildren, becoming Christians or worshiping Jesus. And so growing up, I'm Chinese American, but my family were originally immigrants into the States back in the 60s. And as I was growing up, I would see in other Chinese homes, there would be these pictures of maybe grandparents or aunts and uncles that had passed away. And there would be essentially like a little mini altar of just, some incense. Maybe there'll be like a couple of oranges placed in front of the pictures. Like there's like a food offering. And whenever we went to funerals, depending on what religion or what faith that the family member who passed away had, or the faith of the family, if they were ancestral worshipers, one of the common customs was that as you approach the body, that you would bow down to it 3 times. It is sort of like a out of respect, but also it's a precursor to what eventually will be later on as you visit the grave yearly on the Day of the Dead. You would be offering kind of this respect, and also offering different things like money or food that would be essentially burnt up so that they could eat or use that material in the afterlife. And so a lot of Chinese parents had this kind of imagery in their mind that the love that our children will show to me, especially after I pass away, is that they will do this ancestral worship. They will take care of me into the afterlife. And so it's very difficult then for our Chinese, person who's grown up in that kind of custom and culture, where love for your deceased ones even continues in the afterlife, in the showing of burning of money and burning of food to give to your ancestor, that then when your children or your grandchildren convert and become followers of Jesus, worshipers of Yahweh, they almost will assume and instantly take that as, you don't love me anymore.
Wow.
Like how could you betray me like this? Who's going to take care of me? And that, like, who's going to give me the money that I need in the afterlife? Who's going to give me the food and clothes that I need in the afterlife? And so there's this sense of almost like betrayal and hurt that is part of the difficulty of converting, right? Yeah. And this is an issue that comes up a lot in Chinese immigrant churches or Chinese heritage churches still. And, especially like what do Christians do on the Day of the Dead? Because culturally, it's seen as being very, very disrespectful or insulting to not visit the grave and not offer this food and offer this money and paper, clothes, and whatever else that would be burned. That it's like, how can you not do this? How can you not take care of your family member? And so it really touches at the emotion and also the sense of like loyalty to your family. And so for a person of Chinese heritage to convert to Christianity, to convert to the worship of Jesus, it's treacherous almost. It's traitorous.
Intense. Clearly intense.
And so that's why it's always been a very difficult thing. And that when, peers of mine in my youth ministry days, that they would become Christian, that was always one of the things that they butted heads immediately with their parents. was they interpreted it meaning you don't love me and you don't love this family anymore. Yeah. And the lived out reality is over time, we as Chinese Christians, is that we actually are showing love to our family, but love that is expressed in a way that honors also Yahweh. It honors Christ and honors, like that we are not going to bow down to our ancestors as though they are gods that we worship, but that we will remember their memory.
Boy, this, in what you're describing again, fascinating to me, because I am not part of this story, is the which God question. It's front and center in the modern story of how a Chinese person thinks of conversion. So you're not asking Jesus into your heart. You're not asking him to apply his righteousness to your account. Those kind of things are so, off topic in the sense. The question is, are you going to worship Jesus above the ancestors that you have? And
in fact, one of the, we've always had missionaries in my Chinese Heritage Church. They would come, and one of them was from Hong Kong, and he told of this story. It was the first time I heard it. I was like less than a year old as a Christian at that time, and he told the story of one family that he had ministered to, he had evangelized, he shared the gospel with, and they became Christians. And one of the first things that they did was that they went to that little miniature family altar. And we're talking about like precious photos, right? Like these are photos that you will not be able to reproduce. And they threw the pictures and the altars away.
Wow.
And he as a pastor went and prayed with the family. The other church staff came to pray for them and sort of it strengthened them as they did this, because this is like such a rooted thing culturally. And so they threw it away. And he then told us that night after they had left, the husband and wife who had converted, who had come to worship Jesus, they had the worst argument they've ever had in their entire marriage. And that they were so close to shouting out of wanting to be divorced from one another.
Wow.
It was so intense. That's how bad it was. And they eventually talked with him and like, what? Like, we don't understand. How did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did it come up after we had this moment? And so there was this kind of wonderment. Was this a moment of spiritual fighting and battling? Because what did they do? They literally just threw out a very visible, tangible symbol of the worship that they were offering to family members for the worship of Jesus. And it was the worst moment in their family life. And then they couldn't comprehend how did this even come about? Where did this come about? And anyways, that left an impression on my mind of like, there is contention, there is rivalry. And as I said in that podcast, like that's one of the things that the DCW has helped me continue to expand on, is that there are actual stakes in hand in the worship that we give to Yahweh or not, or to Jesus or not. And that it's not just lip service. There is something there that we cannot just brush aside.
Can I apply that story directly how Acts sounds in a Divine Council worldview setting for me? Then Philip opened his mouth, Acts 8, beginning at this scripture, preached Jesus to him. As they went down the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "See, here is water." We're supposed to be asking ourselves, what in the world does water have to do with responding to Jesus? But I think that baptism, what hinders me to be baptized, and there is a textual issue here, so I'm not going to read the rest of it as to what happened exactly, but the point is the water clearly is his conversion thought. He thinks, I believe, in other words, I'm on target totally, I believe, if I say to myself, the eunuch was thinking, I believe in Jesus. I'm going to have to make a decision, and decisions are made by baptism in our world. That's how we do it, and so he gets baptized. Same with Acts 16. Sirs, what must I do to be saved? Here's the Philippian jailer. They said, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved, you and your house. That argument with the two spouses made me think of this. They spoke the word of the Lord to him and all that were in his house. He took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes, and immediately he and his family were baptized. Again, what does baptism have to do with hearing about Jesus. I think as their culture had this getting into water and saying why they're there, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and down and up they go, that it was their signature moment of, as Dr. Heiser would say, spiritual warfare. I'm siding with the deity now, who was crucified, risen, and ascended to the right hand of the Father. I'm dispensing with the gods of my peoples, my family, and so forth and so on. So is that fair? I'm reading your story of that, that story of that missionary, and I'm hearing the New Testament give the same story with a different spin because of the culture of Acts 8 and Acts 16, where baptism was that moment. In that story you gave about your missionary friend, the conversion moment, almost I'd like to call it, would be taking that photograph that is unable to be reproduced. I am throwing away history here, but I'm doing it because of my choice of which God. I think that's exactly what's going on here. And I don't want to denigrate, all the atonement models that we talk about, but notice how atonement is not the question. It gets into the theology of other things, but I always find that we get into atonement issues far too quickly when we talk about salvation, when really the issue is, as you said, for some people, taking a picture and throwing it away. So,
yeah.
Fascinating. All right, let's finish up the chapter, and I'm going to grab a little bit out of 28 because it's on the same topic. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. Well, you would have too, right? I mean, the whole story turns on this. And by hatred, of course, we're talking about angst and anger. By the way, when they finally meet, and this will be 32-ish or so, they're fine. There's Jacob fears for his life, but Esau has mellowed, so it's not going to be as bad as we think. But he says there at the end of 41, the days of my mourning for my father are at hand. Again, they thought he was about to die. Then I will kill my brother Jacob, but he never does. And the word of Esau, her older son, was told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob and said, surely your brother Esau is intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Flee to my brother Laban. We met him earlier back in 26. He lives in Beersheba at this point, apparently. Or flee from Beersheba, that's where they're living, up to Haran. Good point, or good possibility. Rebekah never sees Jacob again, from what we know. I mean, we don't have any story of Rebekah seeing her loved son Jacob ever again. Yeah. Stay with him a few days. Hopefully his anger will turn from you. And then verse 46, Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. Again, take a guess why. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, Hittites, like these who are the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? And a cultural way of saying it's not worth living if my son marries non-Yahwistic boys or girls. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him, beginning of 28, and charged him, and again, this is kind of the real blessing, shall we say, or, the real charge that he knowingly is saying to Jacob, his son, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. There is his call. Notice again how clearly we're talking a theology of finding a wife who's a Yahwist. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, Rebekah's father, so your uncle, and take yourself a wife from there of the daughters of Laban. We're going to talk again more about Laban here and his loyalty to Yahweh coming up. May God Almighty. So whatever God's name used in 28:3, here we have which God again being answered, the big one. May God Almighty, the Elohim. I don't have my Hebrew in front of me, Mike. 28:3.
It's El Shaddai here.
El Shaddai, okay. El Shaddai make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may have an assembly of peoples, and give you the blessing of your grandfather Abraham. Notice again the passing thus of the which God question. To you and your descendants with you, that you may inherit the land in which you are a stranger, which God gave to Abraham. These are the last words of Isaac to anyone, actually. This is the last time Isaac speaks in our text. He's a rather quiet individual compared to the other patriarchs. So Isaac sent Jacob away, And he went to Paddan Aram to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Syrian. We are meeting again up with some Yahwistic folks. That's the point. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take himself a wife from there. And that is, he blessed him. He gave him a charge saying, you shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, which is kind of why then Esau does take daughters of Canaan.
Yeah.
Again, you can just sense this religious animosity going on between father and son here. He's not going to go to Paddan Aram and find a wife. No, verses 8 and 9. Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac, so he went to his uncle Ishmael and took other non-Yahwistic wives, verse 9. So that leaves us ready for another fascinating story, which we'll leave for next time, the ladder dream that Jacob has, and the visitation moment there. So that'll be plenty to talk about next time. Anything else? Boy, Mike, this reminds me of my days teaching Christian college, where the complaint was that Prof. Johnson saw gods everywhere. And that got back to my administration. And I often just said, I know. But what are you going to do?
I think it's interesting, right? That we started out this episode with the interesting query about, was Isaac's intention trying to corral Esau into the worship of Yahweh, right? And I don't know. I don't know that in 28. It seems like is it because Isaac is sort of resigning himself to the fact that, like, well, the son that I didn't favor has the official blessing, so I guess I got to go with him, and just please, don't marry a Canaanite woman, and and in many ways, like in verse 3, God, El Shaddai bless you and make you fruitful. He's really trying to ensure, is like, you got to worship Yahweh, like you deceiving little son, and yet, like, you have to worship the same God that I'm worshiping, because I gave you the blessing.
Yeah,
and now I'm going to give you it. Yeah.
Thank you, because I think this is a fair, a foretaste of our next podcast. 28:20, coming up in our next conversation, Jacob says this. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if Elohim will be with me and keep me in this way that I'm going, then Yahweh will be my God. Now, that's not a statement of, that's not a classic Billy Graham come down the aisle confession, right? I mean, if God gives me a whole bunch of stuff, basically he says bread, clothing, then I'll take him. So all I'm saying is that, to be fair to the question, in the flow of the narrative, is Jacob a convinced Yahwist at this point? Well, I think he is. Yeah. Have we even heard Jacob enough to talk about Yahweh in the ways that his father Abraham and Isaac are? I would argue, and I'm prepared next time to talk about this, that Jacob's path to Yahweh worship is also rather tenuous compared to Abraham's almost immediate, and Isaac's fairly close behind. Kind of, from what we can tell, Isaac doesn't, go down a path clearly of idolatry. Jacob will have these weird, and again, I'm not going to give it away, but there's going to be some idols involved and conversations with Laban and stuff where you're going to say, oh boy, I thought Jacob was better than this when it came to his worship of Yahweh, but that's to be seen. And that's why, I think we're doing the text justice by looking at it from this angle and just asking, how is their worship going? Who's lining up? How consistently? And is this a pattern even of God being gracious in letting people figure him out even from a distance? And that's going to be my recommendation with Jacob, that he's going to be feeling Yahweh out a little bit and saying things that I would never recommend a Christian say. But in this story, at this point in the story, this is how it would have been. You would have actually wondered, should I take this deity or not? And so far, here's what we got. We got Abraham, who has 26:5. He has kept Yahweh's Torah, even though it's not written down. He has been faithful. Isaac, from everything we can tell, is a Yahwist. And so the God of Abraham and Isaac is a fair statement so far. Now comes the question, Jacob. Let's see what happens to him and how that story unfolds. That will be, again, starting next time with this latter dream, maybe the beginning of the answer to that question. So anything to say in closing?
I think it's fair to say that, right? Like it is interesting. Like I can almost partly see this as a way of how, when I became a Christian, one of the first things that I had learned was, and the preacher that I heard at this teen conference, the first one I ever went to at my Chinese Heritage Church, he was speaking to teenagers who were the children of deacons and people who have been at the church for decades. And he said this thing that I guess had more impact on them than it did for me, because I was still a brand new Christian. But that you cannot ride on the coattails of your parents' faith.
Yeah.
And that everyone has to make their own decision. And I think it's interesting that we see, Abraham chooses, and he had great motivation of why he chooses Yahweh. Mm-hmm. And Isaac follows closely along, but it's now the grandchild who is wondering, in some sense, like we see this journey of like, is this Elohim, is this deity really worth following? I'm not sure. I'm not convinced myself. He doesn't seem to be protecting my older brother. And I think, again, that's what a DCW provides, in that as we read this text, we're seeing a different kind of an allegiance or a loyalty journey, right? Of a person who is wondering, there are decent options. Now, is Yahweh the best option? Is he the one that I really ought to lay my life down for? And the reality is, in our world, in our culture, in 21st century America right now, that often is the question, right? That often is like, why should I follow Jesus when I can just live a life that would be absent of him? Like, why is he the better option? And people want to know the answer to that question.
I'm saying this to myself as you talk, again, just test driving Hebrews 11. And I was thinking this is going to be what I found, and it's there. How you have by faith, Abraham did this and that and the other. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. So at least the Hebrews 11 author is looking back saying, whatever he said to Esau and Jacob, he did it knowing who his God was. Mm-hmm. Interesting then, 11:21. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed his sons in a certain way. In other words, it kind of skips through the if question of 28:20, Genesis 28:20, if this God will be with me, and kind of lets Jacob grow up, and goes right to the end of his life, Genesis 48 and 49. And so that's an interesting way of possibly saying that Hebrews 11 admits that, in kind of a backwards way or a quiet way, the life of Jacob, when it comes to his loyalty to Yahweh, is a bit of a tenuous road. And again, I'm defending my view of Genesis 32 here as we go. That could it be that when this guy is in a tight spot with another deity, he makes the mistake of asking for a blessing from it? So anyway, I don't want to overdo that, but we'll wait for that when we get there. Next time we'll pick it up middle of 28. Talk about the gate of heaven that opens up over Jacob. And again, the DCW has a lot to say about that gate of heaven idea. Not to be weird about it. This, again, we don't want to try to slap on the DCW an idea that we look for weird stuff, but it makes sense of weird stuff. I think that's how I'd like to say it. That's how Dr. Mike would say it too, that if it's weird, it's important, often in the Bible, because A, our pastors have probably skipped over it during their last sermon, or B, there's a reason it's not weird to them. And this gate of heaven idea was not weird to them at all. And it might be weird to us, but let's look at that next time. So until then, thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you then.